some of the areas that you mentioned on the south side and the southwest side that are potentially developable in the next few years are industrial parcels. We have the issue of them sometimes being protected manufacturing areas. Can you talk a little about which parts of the south and southwest side you think are suitable for residential development, if there are impediments to that, and sort of what the likelihood might be that those will be removed?
Well, there are always impediments, and but I think the south side all the way down to South Shore and beyond is a very interesting area. And if you look at those neighborhoods, even where they are still largely built up, there are still opportunities for redevelopment, conversion, and so forth. There are, as you pointed out, also large tracts of underutilized industrial land, and I think this is an area where ultimately the city of Chicago is going to have to reassess their policies regarding these areas, because how long do you wait for the industry that doesn't appear to be coming back? In other words, those places once held heavy industries and smokestack industries that have largely departed. They didn't go to North Carolina, they went to the Far East, and they're probably not coming back. And yet we've seen tremendous growth in service sector jobs, and I think if you ask the average person, would you rather be working on an assembly line or in an office environment for better wages, that you might find that those industrial jobs that everyone romanticized were maybe not all they were cracked up to be. Members of my family worked in factories, and they don't remember it fondly. Nevertheless, I think the city does need to reserve some space for industry. I think, to me, it's very much an issue of which spaces they have chosen to reserve. Industry today, the kinds of industry that we can realistically attract, are very transportation dependent, and they don't rely on rail, they rely on trucks. So what you need is land that's immediately accessible to interstate routes and so forth. Unfortunately, the traditional industrial base of Chicago was in many cases centered along the Chicago River, because when those areas were first developed, the river was viable transportation, and it was a source for processed water. The Chicago River was essentially used as an industrial sewer for 100 years, and now people recognize that it is a resource, and one that perhaps should not be squandered on industrial uses for the next 100 years, that maybe there are better places to put industry. If you look at most of the PMDs along the north and south branches of the Chicago River, a lot of those sites are inaccessible without passing through existing residential neighborhoods, which is not necessarily a circumstance that you want to support or recreate. So I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for the city to recognize the potential that exists in the river. We have done a number of projects on the river, ranging from loft spaces, such as the Montgomery Ward's building. One of the first was Riverbank Lofts at Grand and Kingsbury, and I think that was the first place that my eyes were opened, because I found that people were paying Lakeshore Drive prices to live on the Chicago River, and that the difference in price from one side of the building to the other was significant. We have since done a number of smaller developments, including some single-family homes up along the north branch of the Chicago River, where homes have sold for $1.2 million or more, because the river is a tremendous amenity. And if you look at the potential it has to create a sort of linear park with recreation space that kind of links Chicago from the southwest through the downtown and back out to the north, I personally think that the city should be at least considering reevaluating some of those PMDs that are located on the river. For example, in the last 6 months, we've learned that Finkel foundry is considering moving out. That PMD was created expressly to protect Finkel, and now they're going. Similarly, I think I heard recently that Gutman Tannery is closing or is leaving, and again,
Gutman Tannery doesn't tan anything anyway.
Well, but the point is that they occupy a site on the river that, you know, they're historically there because it was cheap water and free sewage disposal, and there's no particular reason for a business like that to be there anymore.
The Finkel site in the Clybourne corridor, sort of between the Lincoln Park and Bucktown neighbourhoods, is obviously a site that I'm guessing a lot of developers spend a lot of time daydreaming about. If you had access to that site, what kind of development could you see working in that area? Would there need to be rehabilitation of the river or changing of roads and infrastructure? What sort of housing could you envisage in that area of the Finkel site?
Well, I mean, as it unfolds, I think that this is going to be an interesting controversy. It's certainly a tremendous opportunity for the city to rethink its policies regarding these areas. Whether or not there's the political courage to look at that, I can't say. I do think that it would be a tragedy to not master plan an area like that. You have an opportunity to put in new streets. The infrastructure that's there is probably old and for the most part obsolete, and so there really is a chance to kind of rethink the way that area would or could be redeveloped. To me, it would be sad to see it, say, all become a commercial shopping mall, or simply, you know, miles and miles of townhomes or through six flats. But I think that if it's carefully thought through, that it could easily support a mixture of housing and an environment that would extend the kind of dynamic that you have immediately to the east, where you have a lot of small-scale commercial that is walkable and accessible. I think we need to be thinking about those things at a time when transportation costs and are becoming an issue, and congestion is something that we all experience. That's not a neighborhood where you want to be driving on Saturday. And yet, I think that with proper design considerations and a sufficient diversity of use, that you could make a very viable and attractive addition to the existing neighborhood. Now, whether the existing neighbors are prepared to tolerate that, I guess we'll see.